Alright, so now that you guys have seen that amazing video that Raj worked so hard on, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Dean's Ambassadors Council. My name is Julie Singh. I'll be the executive chair for the upcoming year. What the Dean's Ambassadors Council does is basically we aim to bridge the gap between students, faculty, and staff on campus, especially in the School of Social Sciences. Other than this great event, we do a lot of other great events. For example, we have Dean's Day coming up on May 19th, so I hope to see you all there. Dean's Day is a great event where all students, faculty, staff come out. We have professors barbecuing, a lot of fun booths, interacting, socializing. It's a lot of fun. Other than that, we do student panels, alumni panels, graduate panels to get you all involved and interested and get to know more about the career path that you're interested in. We have a lot of other events. For example, on Halloween, we do a haunted house, which is a lot of fun. That also brings out all students and staff. So it's a really great opportunity to get involved in, and if not, we just love to see you all out in our events and participating and getting to know your community, basically. So our application is actually due tomorrow, so I know it's kind of short notice, but it's not a long application, and it's a really great opportunity. I've been a part of it for 2 years, and it's literally had a big impact on my time here at UCI. There's a flyer that's inserted in your program, so you can take a look at that and check out the application if you're interested. There's a lot of deans here today. If you have any questions after, we'll be around. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our moderator for this amazing debate. His name is Dr. DeCipio, and he's a professor in political science and the Chicano Latino department. He is also the interim chair of political science, and he's also the director of the UCI Center for the Study of Democracy. So I'd like to introduce to you Dr. DeCipio.
Thank you very much and welcome. I appreciate you all coming out tonight. It's good to see some familiar faces from some of the past debates. Tonight's topic is the United States Congress should declare war on the Islamic State, ISIS. Taking the affirmative position will be Professor Petrarca. Taking the negative position, Professor Schoenfeld. Professor Petrarca, well, both of my colleagues in the Department of Political Science, Professor Petrarca, the Associate Dean in the School of Social Sciences, and Professor Schoenfeld, the Dean Emeritus of the School of Social Sciences. So you have very senior figures here to observe and learn from. And I encourage you to pay attention to the way they structure their arguments. These are skills that I've observed could be applied in some of your research papers. They don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, and I should make that clear. They are not necessarily articulating their own positions. Instead, they're trying to make an argument. They're trying to convince you of the position that they're taking. So watch the way they structure their argument as well as what they say. So you have a sense of the structure of the debate. Professor Petrarca will have 10 minutes to speak in the affirmative. Professor Schoenfeld, 10 minutes in the negative. Professor Schoenfeld will then have 5 minutes as a rebuttal to Professor Petrarca, and Professor Petrarca 5 minutes to rebut Professor Schoenfeld. We'll then open it up to you for questions for about half an hour. We'll make sure that each get questions. We'll alternate between the two. So begin to think of questions you might ask during their initial presentations. We'll then give each 5 minutes to have their final comments, beginning with Professor Schoenfeld, the negative rebuttal, and we'll conclude with Professor Petrarca and the affirmative rebuttal. On that note, why don't I ask our debaters to come forward?
Professor Schoenfeld, Professor DeCipio, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the Dean's Ambassadors Council for bringing us together on this very somber evening. With apologies to Shakespeare's Mark Antony, we contemplate tonight whether this great nation shall cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. This matter must not be treaded upon lightly. In truth, my colleagues and friends, this nation is at war already throughout the Middle East against an adversary called ISIS, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, and we have been at war in that part of the world for some time now. That we are at war, I submit to you this evening, is not a matter of contestation. Rather, the more subtle, but in many ways far more important political, legal, and constitutional question is whether Congress shall or should declare war on the Islamic State. There is much more than semantic niceties at stake when we differentiate among what it means to be at war, to make war, and to declare war. It is not politically or, in my view, constitutionally proper for the President of the United States, not even for Barack Obama, to be at war by making war without a congressional declaration of it. Notwithstanding the countless wars which have been waged by American presidents of both political parties since Congress last passed a declaration of war, now nearly 73 years ago in June of 1942, by the way, against Romania, I rise without hesitation this evening in affirmation of the proposition that the United States Congress should declare war on the Islamic State. As knowledgeable and well-informed members of the American political community, you all appreciate the profound terrorist threat which ISIS poses to the United States homeland and to our allies. As Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein said more than 9 months ago, the threat ISIS poses cannot be overstated. Her Republican colleague, Jim Inhofe, at the same time claimed that ISIS is, quote, rapidly developing a method of blowing up a major U.S. city, end quote. And as a result, quote, we're in the most dangerous position we've ever been in as a nation. The most dangerous position we've ever been in as a nation. We must assume that these well-informed senior members of the United States Senate are not engaging in mere hyperbole. 2 months ago, after the United States military had already been bombing ISIS targets in Iraq and Syria for half a year, President Obama sent a joint resolution to Congress seeking congressional authorization for the use of military force against the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, the other name for ISIS, ISIL. Just to be clear, in February, Obama asked Congress to authorize the use of military force, which had been taking place already at the unilateral behest of the President for the previous 6 months. In that proposed joint resolution, this time at least, Obama did not mince words, stating that ISIL, quote, poses a grave threat to the people and territorial integrity of Iraq and Syria, regional stability, and the national security interests of the United States and its allies and partners, end quote. As of this evening, Congress has yet to pass the proposed joint resolution. Congress has yet to authorize the continued use of military force to pursue and protect U.S. national interests that the President has been using now for nearly 9 months. If you're confused by this, let me assure you, you are not alone. The American people are confused, our allies are confused, and dare I suggest that those who would wish this nation harm are confused as well, although that might not be such a terrible thing. A declaration of war by Congress, a power and responsibility given to Congress in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, is the only remedy, not merely to end the confusion of the status quo, which is a relatively minor thing, but to remedy the grave threat, President Obama's words, not mine, to remedy the grave threat to this nation posed by ISIS. Even if Congress were to vote overwhelmingly tomorrow morning, possibly as a result of this evening's debate, in support of the President's proposed joint resolution authorizing the President to continue doing what he's been doing already, that would do nothing to address the gravity of the threat that we face. The nation does not need another vote from Congress which meekly authorizes the President to make war. This nation, in the face of this grave threat, must demand that the President ask for a declaration of war from Congress, and that Congress immediately adopt such a declaration. In the event that President Obama refuses to make such a request, Congress should act unilaterally to pass such a declaration, and unilateral action is permissible under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. There are numerous advantages to responding to the ISIS threat with a declaration of war, instead of either doing nothing or simply obtaining congressional authorization. I now identify 4 independent advantages to you of a declaration of war. Number 1, as an empirical matter, when America declares war, America wins war. America has won all 11 of the instances in which war has been declared by Congress. That is a fact which cannot be disputed. The same track record of triumph does not exist in the 11 instances where the making of war by the president has merely been authorized by congressional action. Grave threats demand a response bearing gravitas, and that's exactly what a declaration of war by Congress would signify. Reason number 2, Congress, more so than the executive branch, is in a better position to carry out the will of the American people, which ought to dictate U.S. foreign policy. A congressional debate on a declaration of war helps test the arguments for full-scale military mobilization, which is wanting given the dearth of public scrutiny these arguments have received. Argument number 3, there are advantageous legal differences in this country and abroad between a declaration of war and an authorization to use force. These are legally 2 distinct things. In contrast to a mere authorization from Congress, a declaration of war in itself creates a state of war under international law and legitimates the killing of enemy combatants, the seizure of enemy property, and the apprehension of enemy aliens. With respect to the domestic law, a declaration of war automatically triggers numerous standby statutory authorities, conferring special powers on the president with respect to the military, foreign trade, transportation, communications, manufacturing, alien enemies, and so forth. In contrast, no standby authorities are triggered automatically by an authorization for the president to use force. Argument number 4. A declaration of war will do something which this nation has not really experienced since the 1940s. It will evoke a shared sense of national purpose, and with it, national sacrifice. It should not be as easy to make war as American presidents have made it over the last 70 years, often with explicit congressional acquiescence. A declaration of war will change all that, and will require Americans, all of us, for the first time in 4 generations, to work together to prevail against this grave threat to our freedoms. After insisting that Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat, recently wrote Columbia's Stuart Gottlieb, the Obama administration now recognizes that despite the death of bin Laden, bin Ladenism is alive and well and expanding. This, of course, is because, as Gottlieb explains, the threat was never from a person or a group, but rather from a global ideology, a militant, radicalized version of Sunni Islam. In order to successfully combat the new threat posed by ISIS and like-minded groups around the world, the West will need to join forces with the moderate Sunni world to counter and ultimately defeat the ideology, end quote. As it has for the last 65 years, the United States must take the lead in waging this war, a war which must be fought and which, of course, it goes without saying, must be won. We really have no choice, which is why I ask you to stand boldly with me this evening in calling upon the United States Congress to declare war on the Islamic State. To paraphrase a great leader at a moment of unprecedented national crisis in his nation, a declaration of war by the United States Congress will not be the end of it. It won't even be the beginning of the end of it, but it might, at long last, be the end of the beginning. Thank you very much.
Before I begin, I have 2 points. Number 1, how much did he pay you to do that? Or is it a grade bribe of some sort? And the second observation that I have is that I'd like to thank the people who made this evening possible. I'd like to thank Teresa for her organizational efforts, the ambassadors for their hard work in putting everything together, and I'd like to especially thank Professor DeCipio and Professor Petrarca, both of whom have very serious responsibilities that they're exercising for the university for having taken the time to participate in this evening's event. But last, and certainly not least, I'd like to thank you for coming. Seeing as many of you here tonight at 7 o'clock, when you could be doing God knows what with God knows who, warms the cockles of my heart. So I want to thank you for coming. It makes me feel good about you. Now, I'm opposed to the United States Congress declaring war on ISIS. But let me make it absolutely clear. I believe ISIS is evil, and I believe that ISIS is an enemy of the United States. It's not easy to determine what is the most effective way for us to combat this enemy. But one thing I think is absolutely sure. A formal declaration of war on the Islamic State, as Professor Petrarca has argued for, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. In these opening remarks, what I'd like to do is present to you 7 rather distinct reasons why it makes no sense. Any one of those could be developed in great depth, but I'd just like to briefly trace them out because there are so many reasons why we wouldn't want to have a declaration of war. First, the last time the United States formally declared war was for World War II. It began with the declaration against Japan after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, continued with the declaration against Germany, and then to other combatants. In spite of our many military engagements since then, we have never again formally declared war. Now, there is nothing whatsoever about our conflict with ISIS which raises it to the level of the conflict with Nazi Germany and with fascism as World War II did. Second, the United States has engaged in extended military conflict that was authorized by Congress. Among recent instances, we must include the war in Afghanistan and the subsequent war in Iraq. Both were voted on massively by Congress and strongly endorsed by major bipartisan majorities. Should we follow this path in our struggle against ISIS? Now, I think relatively few people look back on our interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq as major successes. So we should, at a bare minimum, be very cautious about repeating our mistakes. Third, ISIS would never have existed were it not for our military efforts in Iraq, which overthrew the Saddam Hussein regime, and our subsequent engagement and efforts in Iraq. The Sunnis' disenfranchisement by the American occupation forces was the very basis for the development of ISIS. We are effectively ISIS's parents. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, whose friends call him back, and is the leader of ISIS, had been imprisoned since 2004 in the Bucca prison by American forces, as were a number of other people who had been involved in jihadist activities and in activities supporting Saddam Hussein's regime. Eventually he was released, but the alumni of the prison were critical in the development of ISIS, and recent efforts indicate that 17 out of the 24 top leaders all met in that prison. They sort of were brought together under the auspices of the American military engagement. So our extensive military activities in Iraq was an absolutely critical ingredient in the creation of ISIS. A new congressional endorsement for military action or a declaration of war would lead to a new war in Iraq, and this time also in Syria, with comparable results to our last such engagement. We would be playing another game, if I might call it, of whack-a-mole. We have a jihadist force, we go after them, we beat them up, and then they pop up in another corner. That's not going to resolve the issue that we're dealing with. We know that because we tried it once, and more than once. Now let us make no mistake, Saddam Hussein, just like ISIS, was evil and an enemy of the United States. However, he was not the only evil force in the area, nor was he the only enemy of the United States. By getting rid of Hussein, we made the Iranians and the regime in Tehran substantially more powerful than they had ever been before, because we destroyed, single-handedly, their major enemy. Their hostility and fighting with Hussein's Iraq served American purposes. His overthrow served Iranian interests, not American interests. Now ISIS, another force that strongly opposes Iran, is developing in the area. Should we again come to the aid of the Iranians? Are we developing a new alliance with them? I'm not convinced that that's wise international politics. Fifth, the Iraqi armed forces that we trained are an embarrassment. That is the most positive thing that you can say about it. ISIS has not been more successful in conquering territory, in part because of U.S. bombs. In addition, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards have been our boots on the ground in Iraq to fight against ISIS, while in Syria, ISIS struggles against the troops of Assad, aided by Hezbollah. Should the United States be joining forces with Hezbollah, Assad, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? Or should we do what we can to let our enemies kill each other? In my opinion, it is a wise strategy to do whatever we can to allow our enemies to kill each other. Sixth, Al-Qaeda was an unusual jihadist group because of its focus on what they call the far enemy, that is to say, the West. Most jihadist groups' main concerns lie closer to home. This is especially true of the Islamic State, precisely because of its ideology. Its sincere, carefully considered commitment to returning civilization to a 7th century legal environment and ultimately to bringing about the apocalypse. ISIS sees enemies everywhere around it, and while its leadership wishes ill on the United States, the application of Sharia in the Caliphate and expansion to the contiguous lands are its paramount goals, not attacking the United States. Seventh, properly contained, the Islamic State is likely to be its own undoing. No country is its ally, and its ideology ensures that this will remain to be the case. The land it controls, while expansive, is mostly uninhabited and poor. As it stagnates or slowly shrinks, it claims that it is the engine of God's will, and the agents of the apocalypse will weaken, and fewer believers will arrive to help them. And as more reports about misery in the areas under their control leak out, radical Islamist movements elsewhere will be discredited. No one has tried harder than ISIS to implement strict Sharia by violence. No one likes what ISIS is doing. Let us not come to their aid by declaring war. In sum, we do not gain anything by going to a full-fledged war with ISIS, but if we continue the current policy with judiciousness, we may just find that not only has ISIS been degraded, but that the strength of key enemies in the area, Iran, Assad, and Hezbollah, has been diminished. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. We'll now have an affirmative rebuttal, a negative rebuttal from Professor Schoenfeld, will be followed by Professor Petraka doing the affirmative rebuttal.
it is always a mistake in international affairs to act in ways which improve the context for your major enemies. That should not be a very controversial proposal. Our major enemy are the Ayatollahs in Iran. That in spite of the fact that Obama is chit-chatting and being buddy-buddy and at this time in negotiations, that's the central problem. That's the area of danger. Historically, we went to war, as Professor Petrarca would have us do with Saddam Hussein. We destroyed Saddam Hussein. And what did it do? It strengthened the bigger enemies. Why in the world should we go back and make that same mistake again? Yes, we have, as a moral nation, an obligation to do certain things to reduce the capacity of these savages that are leading ISIS and are prepared to exterminate human beings in ways that you would not exterminate cockroaches. We have a responsibility to do certain things to make sure they don't do things as badly as they might. And through the judicious use of bombing, we have accomplished that. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Iranians are fighting with ISIS. Isn't that wonderful? Every time a soldier on either side dies, we win. That's a win-win for America. We blew it when we got rid of Saddam Hussein. He was our major ally against Iran. We must not do that again. That was the central mistake entailed. There was none other than that. We must learn from that error. Professor Petrarca has pointed out rightfully that only a declaration of war, formally, as we did during World War I, during World War II, would unite the American population. Let me tell you a secret. The American population is not willing to be united. That is to say, the other part of this problem is Congress might declare war, but the American people do not want to put 500,000 American troops on the ground in Iraq. And what do we do if we do? Well, what are we up to? Stage one, we drive ISIS out of Iraq into Syria. Okay, then what do? We go into Syria to fight alongside Assad, the chemical warfare hero, to get rid of ISIS? I mean, why not let these people kill each other? That is elegant diplomacy. The United States cannot fix everything. And sometimes when we go in to try to fix things, as Professor Petrarca would have us do, we make it worse. We make it worse for everyone. Because I ask you, do you believe the people of Iraq, as bad off as they were under Saddam Hussein, in subsequent times, their situation has dramatically improved? It has not. It has not. The level of insecurity, the level of random death, the level of killing has dramatically grown thanks to our intervention and getting rid of Saddam Hussein. Let us let ISIS fight with the Revolutionary Guard, fight against Assad. Let us make sure that when we have groups of people who are threatened and who are innocent, that we send in drones and airplanes to make sure that they are not slaughtered. Let us provide armaments, but let us not make the same mistake in spades again.
as disappointing as it is for me to say this, and most of you probably would never have thought that you would have lived this long, Chamberlainism is not dead. You've heard the most recent accounting of it from Professor Schoenfeld. Peace in our time. Chamberlain returned from negotiating with Adolf Hitler, telling the British people that if they just waited and let the Nazis take just a little bit more land in Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland, that all would be well. The Nazis were not interested in international conquest. They just wanted to reunite their people, the German-speaking Czechs.